The iron storm had been raging for 3 days straight, and Marcus Vane stood behind his bar counter watching the purple lightning tear across the black sky outside the reinforced windows of his establishment. He called this place the Drifter's Rest, and it sat on Outpost Kappa 7, a forgotten space station floating at the very edge of colonized space where the star maps ended and the unknown began. Marcus had bought this bar 15 years ago with the last of his military pension, and he had never regretted that decision for a single moment. The station attracted a certain type of visitor, and Marcus had learned to read them all over the years he had spent pouring drinks and listening to stories. Smugglers came here to hide from authorities, and refugees came here to escape wars that had destroyed their home worlds. Criminals came here because nobody asked questions, and broken souls came here because they had nowhere else to go. Marcus understood all of them because he had been broken once too. He had served as a soldier in the Earth Defense Forces for 20 brutal years, and he had seen enough death and destruction to last 1,000 lifetimes. The nightmares still found him sometimes in the dark hours before dawn, but the work of running a bar kept his hands busy and his mind focused on simpler things. Tonight the bar held only a handful of patrons because the storm had grounded every ship on the station. A Vorlaxian mercenary sat in the corner booth cleaning his weapons with obsessive attention to detail. 2 syndicate debt collectors played cards at a table near the back, their cold eyes scanning every face that entered. A group of Martian miners huddled together sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey and telling stories of close calls in the asteroid fields. Marcus wiped down the counter with a worn cloth and listened to the howl of the iron storm, battering the station's shields. The door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, and every head in the bar turned to look at the figure that stumbled through. Marcus had seen thousands of alien species walk through that door over the years, but this one made him pause. The creature was tall, perhaps 7 feet in height, and it wore a tattered cloak that covered most of its body. But Marcus could see enough to know this was something rare and strange. The being had features that seemed both avian and feline at once, with a sharp beak-like mouth and fur-lined plumage that might have been magnificent once, but now hung dull and matted. Its eyes were the most striking feature of all, golden orbs that seemed to hold depths of time and experience that Marcus could not begin to fathom. The creature moved with obvious exhaustion, each step a tremendous effort as it made its way toward the bar. It collapsed onto a stool with a heavy sigh that sounded like wind rushing through ancient trees. Marcus studied the stranger for a long moment, and his universal translator struggled to identify the species. The device flickered and buzzed with confusion, displaying error messages that Marcus had never seen before. Whatever this creature was, it came from somewhere far beyond the cataloged regions of known space. The stranger tried to speak, and its voice came out in a dialect so old and strange that the translator could barely parse the meaning. Marcus caught fragments of words that seemed to be asking for help, for shelter, for something to drink. He also noticed that the creature had no credit chip visible, no identification tags, nothing that would allow it to pay for services on any civilized station. The Vorlaxian mercenary in the corner laughed, a harsh and cruel sound. "Throw it out," the mercenary called across the room. "That feathered vagrant has nothing to offer and will only bring trouble to your establishment." The debt collectors nodded in agreement, their eyes narrow with suspicion and contempt. "We do not need strays in here," one of them added, "especially strays that look like they crawled out of some forgotten corner of dead space." Marcus looked at the stranger, and he saw something in those ancient golden eyes that made his heart ache. He recognized that look because he had worn it himself many years ago. It was the look of someone who had lost everything, someone who had wandered so far and so long that they had forgotten what home even meant. It was the look of someone who expected nothing from the universe except more pain and rejection. Marcus reached under the counter and pulled out a clean glass. He filled it with cold beer from the tap, the golden liquid foaming perfectly as he had done 10,000 times before. He set the glass down in front of the stranger with a gentle thud. "First one is on the house," Marcus said with a small smile. "You look like you have had a hell of a journey, friend." The creature stared at the glass for a long moment as if it could not believe what it was seeing. Those golden eyes lifted to meet Marcus's gaze, and something flickered in their depths that might have been surprise or gratitude, or something far more complex. The stranger wrapped long fingers around the glass and lifted it to its beak-like mouth. It drank slowly, savoring each drop as if it had not tasted anything so simple and good in centuries. When the glass was empty, the creature set it down and spoke again. The translator worked harder this time, and Marcus caught a single word that came through clearly. "Kirith," the stranger said, pointing to itself. "I am called Kirith." Marcus nodded and refilled the glass without being asked. "Marcus Vane," he replied, "and you are welcome to stay here as long as the storm keeps raging outside." Kirith wrapped both hands around the fresh glass and held it close as if drawing warmth. From its presence, the mercenary scoffed and returned to cleaning his weapons. The debt collectors shook their heads and went back to their card game. The miners paid no attention at all, too lost in their own stories and sorrows. But Marcus kept his eyes on the stranger, and he felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in many years. It was the simple human instinct to help someone in need, to offer kindness without expecting anything in return. He had almost forgotten that part of himself existed after so many years of war and loss. Kirith drank in silence, and the iron storm continued to rage outside the windows of the Drifter's Rest. Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple moment would change the fate of empires across 1,000 galaxies, all because one human had decided to pour a beer for a lost stranger on a cold night. At the edge of nowhere, the iron storm showed no signs of stopping, and 5 days passed with every ship on Outpost Kappa 7 still grounded and unable to leave. Marcus had seen bad storms before, but this one seemed almost alive in its fury, as if the universe itself was keeping everyone trapped on this forgotten station for some purpose. He could not understand. Kirith remained at the Drifter's Rest, and Marcus had given the strange creature a small storage room in the back, where it could sleep away from the curious and hostile eyes of other patrons. The room was nothing special, just a cot and some spare blankets and crates of supplies stacked against the walls. But Kirith had accepted it with a gratitude that seemed far too deep for such a simple gesture. Every day Marcus brought food from the kitchen, whatever scraps and leftovers he could spare without hurting his business too much. The creature ate slowly and carefully, and Marcus noticed that it seemed to savor every bite as if food itself was a luxury. It had gone without for a very long time. Word spread quickly through the small station that Marcus was harboring a strange vagrant who could not pay for anything. The other bar owners laughed at him when he went to buy supplies. "You are losing credits on that feathered beggar," one of them sneered. "What do you expect to gain from such foolish charity?" Marcus shrugged and said nothing because he had no answer that would make sense to people who measured everything in profit and loss. The patrons of his own bar were no kinder in their judgments. The Vorlaxian mercenary made a point of mocking Kirith whenever the creature emerged from the back room. "Look at the mighty vagrant," the mercenary would announce in a loud voice. "Perhaps it will dance for us if we throw scraps on the floor." The debt collectors watched Kirith with cold suspicion and warned Marcus that harboring unknown aliens was a good way to attract trouble from powerful enemies. "You do not know what that thing is or where it came from," one of them said with a voice like ice. "It could be a spy or a criminal or something far worse, and you will pay the price for your stupidity when the truth comes out." Marcus listened to all of these warnings and ignored every single one. He had his own reasons for helping Kirith, and they had nothing to do with credits or profit or any kind of reward. The truth was that Marcus recognized something in the stranger that he saw in himself. Every time he looked in the mirror, he knew what it felt like to be lost and alone in a universe that did not care whether you lived or died. He knew the weight of carrying wounds that could not be seen, the kind that lived in the heart and the mind rather than the flesh. 20 years of war had taught him that the galaxy was full of cruelty and indifference, but he refused to add to that darkness. If he could offer one lost soul a moment of peace and safety, then that was enough reason to do it. On the 6th night of the storm, Kirith came out of the back room and sat at the bar counter while the other patrons had gone to their quarters. Marcus poured 2 glasses of beer and sat down across from the creature. They drank in silence for a while, and the only sound was the distant rumble of thunder from the storm outside. Then Kirith began to speak. And this time, the translator worked well enough for Marcus to understand most of the words. The creature spoke of a great war that had happened so long ago, that the stars themselves had been young. It spoke of an empire that had stretched across more galaxies than Marcus could imagine, a civilization of beings called the Griffin Sovereigns, who had guided the universe through ages of darkness and light. It spoke of betrayal from within, of trusted allies who had turned against their masters and shattered everything that had been built over countless millennia. Marcus listened without interrupting, and he saw the pain in those golden eyes grow deeper with every word. Kirith had lost everything, not just a home or a family, but an entire way of existence that had defined its purpose for longer than most species had existed. I wandered, Kirith said in a voice heavy with exhaustion. I wandered through the void between galaxies, watching younger civilizations rise and fall, searching for something I could not name. What were you searching for? Marcus asked quietly. Kirith was silent for a long moment before answering. I do not know, the creature admitted. Perhaps I was searching for a reason to continue existing, a sign that the universe still held something worth believing in. Marcus nodded slowly and refilled both their glasses. Did you find it? He asked. Kirith looked at him with those ancient golden eyes, and something shifted in their depths that Marcus could not quite read. I am not certain, Kirith replied, but I am beginning to think that perhaps I have. They drank together until the station's artificial dawn began to brighten the windows. Marcus did not press for more details because he understood that some wounds needed time and patience before they could be shared. He simply offered his presence and his silence and his willingness to listen whenever Kirith was ready to speak. Over the following days, Kirith began to help around the bar in small ways. The creature cleaned tables and washed glasses and organized the storage room with a quiet efficiency that surprised Marcus. It seemed to take comfort in having simple tasks to perform, as if the routine of work provided an anchor in a universe that had become strange and unfamiliar. The other patrons continued to mock and complain, but Marcus noticed that their words seemed to bother Kirith less and less. Something was changing in the creature, a slow return of strength and dignity that had been buried under layers of grief and exhaustion. On the 10th night, Kirith asked Marcus a question that caught him off guard. Why do you help me? The creature asked. You gain nothing from my presence here, and your other customers despise you for showing me kindness. Marcus thought about the question for a long moment before answering. Maybe that is exactly the point, he said finally. Maybe kindness only means something when there is nothing to gain from it. Kirith studied his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel as if his very soul was being examined. Your species is young, Kirith said softly. You have existed for barely a heartbeat in the lifespan of the cosmos, and yet you say such things as if they are obvious truths. Marcus shrugged and smiled. We have our flaws, he admitted, but sometimes we get things right. Kirith made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. Neither of them knew that their time of peace was about to end, or that forces beyond imagination were already moving toward this forgotten station. At the edge of nowhere, the storm was finally beginning to clear, and with clear skies would come a danger that would test everything Marcus believed about kindness and courage and the power of a single human heart. The iron storm finally broke on the morning of the 12th day, and the purple lightning faded from the sky to reveal the cold and distant stars that surrounded Outpost Kappa 7. Marcus stood at the window of his bar and watched the first ships begin to power up their engines. In the docking bays below, soon the smugglers and refugees and criminals would scatter back into the void, and life on the station would return to its normal quiet rhythm. He turned to look at Kirith, who sat at the bar counter nursing a cup of warm tea. Storm is over, Marcus said. I suppose you will be wanting to move on now that the ships can fly again. Kirith looked up at him with those ancient golden eyes, and Marcus thought he saw something like hesitation there. I have nowhere to go, the creature admitted quietly. I have been wandering for so long that all destinations seem equally meaningless. Marcus nodded and pulled out a cloth to wipe down the counter. Well, you are welcome to stay here as long as you want, he said. I could use the help around the place, and you have gotten pretty good at washing glasses. Before Kirith could respond, the station's emergency alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across every surface, and the automated warning system blared a message that made Marcus's blood run cold. Attention all residents of Outpost Kappa 7. 3 warships have exited hyperspace and are approaching the station. They have been identified as vessels of the Vexari Dominion. All residents are ordered to remain calm and await further instructions. Marcus felt his stomach drop because he knew exactly what the Vexari Dominion was. They were one of the most feared military powers in the known galaxy. A brutal empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds through terror and violence. Their ships were weapons of mass destruction, and their soldiers were trained from birth to show no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. What could such a force possibly want with a forgotten outpost at the edge of nowhere? Marcus looked at Kirith and saw the answer written in the creature's eyes. The ancient being had gone very still, and those golden eyes held a mixture of fear and resignation that told Marcus everything he needed to know. "They are here for you," Marcus said. It was not a question. Kirith nodded slowly. "I had hoped they would not find me," the creature said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I had hoped that I had hidden myself well enough in the forgotten corners of this young galaxy." Before Marcus could ask any questions, the station's communication system crackled to life with a new message. The voice that spoke was cold and cruel, dripping with authority and contempt. "Attention residents of this pitiful station. I am Warlord Thalvix of the Vexari Dominion, and I have come to collect a fugitive that you are harboring." The voice paused for effect before continuing. "You have 1 hour to surrender the creature that calls itself Kirith. If you comply, we will take what we came for and leave your station intact. If you refuse or attempt to hide the fugitive, we will reduce this entire outpost to atoms and everyone on it will die." The message ended, and for a moment there was only silence in the bar. Then chaos erupted throughout the station. Marcus could hear shouting and running feet in the corridors outside, as residents scrambled to figure out what was happening. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered outside the Drifter's Rest, and their voices were angry and frightened. The door burst open and a mob of station residents poured into the bar. The Vorlaxian mercenary was at the front, his weapons drawn and his eyes fixed on Kirith with murderous intent. "There it is," the mercenary shouted. "That is the thing they want, and we are going to give it to them before they kill us all." The debt collectors nodded in agreement, and even the Martian miners, who had always minded their own business, looked ready to drag Kirith out by force. "Hand it over, Marcus," one of the debt collectors demanded. "This is not the time for your foolish charity. One worthless vagrant is not worth the lives of everyone on this station." Marcus looked at the angry mob, and he looked at Kirith sitting alone and afraid at his bar. He thought about everything he had seen in his 20 years of war, all the times he had watched people abandon each other when things got difficult. He thought about the kind of man he had wanted to be when he left the military and bought this bar. He thought about what it meant to offer someone your protection and then take it away. The moment it became inconvenient, Marcus walked behind the bar and reached under the counter. He pulled out an old rifle, a relic from his soldier days that he had kept cleaned and loaded all these years. He checked the power cell and raised the weapon to a ready position. "Not happening," Marcus said in a calm and steady voice. "I poured this creature a drink, and that makes it my guest. And in my bar, we do not hand over our guests to murderers." The mob stared at him in disbelief. "Are you insane?" the mercenary demanded. "One human with an antique rifle against the entire Vexari Dominion. They will kill you and then they will kill all of us anyway." Marcus shrugged without lowering his weapon. "Maybe," he admitted, "but at least I will die knowing I did not betray someone who trusted me." The crowd muttered and shifted, but nobody seemed willing to challenge a man with a rifle and nothing left to lose. "You have 45 minutes, the debt collector said with venom in his voice. "When that deadline passes and the Dominion starts firing, your death will be on your own head." The mob retreated from the bar, and Marcus was left alone with Kirith. The creature looked at him with an expression that was impossible to read. "You would die for a stranger," Kirith said softly. "You would sacrifice everything you have built here for someone you barely know." Marcus lowered the rifle and leaned against the counter. "I did not build this place to become the kind of person who throws people to the wolves," he said. "If that is what survival costs, then I would rather not survive." Kirith was silent for a long moment. "Your species is remarkable," the creature finally said. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall across countless ages, and I have never encountered anything quite like humanity." Marcus laughed despite the terror of their situation. "We are just stubborn," he said. "Too stubborn to know when we are supposed to give up." Outside the window, the 3 warships of the Vexari Dominion hung in the darkness of space like predators waiting to strike. The clock was ticking, and Marcus had no idea how he was going to survive the next hour. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not betray Kirith, no matter what the cost. The minutes crawled by like wounded animals, and Marcus watched the clock on the wall with a growing sense of dread. 30 minutes remained before the Vexari Dominion's deadline, and he still had no plan beyond standing in front of Kirith with his old rifle and hoping for a miracle. The station had gone quiet outside as residents huddled in their quarters, waiting to see if they would live or die. Some had tried to flee in their ships, but the Dominion warships had fired warning shots that turned the vessels back to the docking bays. Nobody was leaving until this was over. Kirith sat motionless at the bar, those ancient golden eyes staring at something far beyond the walls of the Drifter's Rest. Marcus poured himself a drink and sat down across from the creature. "Want to tell me what this is really about?" he asked. "Who are you that the Vexari Dominion would send 3 warships to find you?" Kirith was silent for a long moment. "It is a very long story," the creature finally said, "and I am not certain you would believe it even if I told you." Marcus gestured at the warships visible through the window. "We have about 25 minutes before they start shooting," he said, "and I think I have earned the right to know why I am about to die." Kirith made a sound that might have been a sigh. "You have earned far more than that," the creature admitted. "Very well, I will tell you the truth." The ancient being turned to face Marcus fully, and something in its posture changed. The weariness that had hung over Kirith since the first night seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a quiet dignity that Marcus had not seen before. "I told you that I was searching for something as I wandered the void between galaxies," Kirith began. "What I did not tell you was what I was searching for, or why." Marcus nodded and waited for the creature to continue. "Long ago, before your son was born, before most of the stars in your sky had even begun to shine, there was an empire that spanned 1,000 galaxies." Kirith's voice grew stronger as it spoke. "We called ourselves the Griffin Sovereigns, and we were the guardians of existence itself. We guided younger species toward wisdom. We maintained the balance between order and chaos. We protected the cosmos from threats that you cannot even imagine." Marcus listened with growing amazement. "I was the last ruler of that empire," Kirith continued. "I sat upon a throne of light and commanded power that could reshape reality with a thought. But I was betrayed by those I trusted most." The creature's golden eyes flickered with ancient pain. "The Vexari were once our servants, a warrior caste we created to defend the empire against external threats. But they grew ambitious and hungry for power they were never meant to wield. They overthrew you," Marcus said quietly. "They tried," Kirith replied. "They shattered the empire and scattered the Griffin Sovereigns across the void. Most of my kind were destroyed in the war that followed, and I was left alone, the last of my people." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him like a heavy cloak. "So you have been hiding from them ever since," he said. "Not hiding," Kirith corrected. "Wandering. I stripped away my power and my form and walked among the younger species disguised as a vagrant and a beggar. I wanted to see what the universe had become in our absence, to understand if anything remained worth protecting." The creature turned those golden eyes on Marcus with an intensity that made his heart race. "I tested the hearts of species across 100 galaxies," Kirith said. "I approached them in weakness and need, asking for nothing more than a moment of kindness. And do you know what I found?" Marcus shook his head. "Every single one turned me away," Kirith said with a sadness that seemed to fill the entire room. "Every species I encountered measured my worth by what I could offer them, and finding nothing of value, they cast me aside." The creature paused and its voice softened. "Until I came here," Kirith said. "Until I stumbled into your bar on a stormy night and a human I had never met poured me a drink and asked for nothing in return." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "That was just basic decency," he said. anyone would have done the same. No, Kirith replied firmly. They would not. I have seen it with my own eyes across thousands of years and countless civilizations. Your species is young and flawed and sometimes terrible. But there is something in your hearts that I have not found anywhere else in the cosmos. A warning alarm sounded, indicating that only 10 minutes remained before the deadline. Marcus gripped his rifle tighter, knowing that it would be useless against the power that waited outside. But Kirith rose from the bar stool, and as the creature stood, something began to change. The tattered cloak fell away to reveal a form that was suddenly radiant with golden light. The dull and matted plumage began to shine as if each feather held a captured star. Kirith's body grew taller and broader, and ancient armor materialized from nothing to cover the magnificent form beneath. Marcus stumbled backward as the small storage room, and the humble bar suddenly felt inadequate to contain the being that stood before him. You would die for a stranger, Kirith said, and its voice now resonated with power that made the walls tremble. Your species has existed for barely a cosmic heartbeat, and yet this is who you are. Marcus could not find words to respond. He was looking at something that his mind could barely comprehend, a being of such immense power and presence that it seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around itself. His translator finally managed to process what it was seeing, and the words that appeared on its display made Marcus's knees go weak. Kirith the Undying, last of the Griffin sovereigns, former ruler of the Celestini Dominion. The Vexari believe they killed me long ago, Kirith said. They built their empire on the ashes of mine and forgot to fear what they could not destroy. The ancient sovereign walked toward the door, each step leaving glowing footprints on the floor. I have spent ages asking myself if the universe still deserved to be protected, Kirith said without looking back. Tonight, you answered that question for me. Marcus found his voice at last. What are you going to do? He asked. Kirith paused at the door and turned those blazing golden eyes back to meet his gaze. I am going to remind the Vexari Dominion why my kind were called sovereigns, the ancient being replied. And then I am going to repay a debt that your species does not even know it is owed. The door opened, and Kirith walked out into the void between the station and the waiting warships. Marcus rushed to the window and watched in disbelief as the last Griffin sovereign strode through space itself without suit or ship, walking on nothing but starlight and ancient power. The countdown had reached 0, and the Vexari Dominion was about to learn that some things in the universe were still worth fearing. Marcus pressed his face against the window of the Drifter's Rest and watched something impossible unfold in the darkness of space. Kirith walked among the stars as if the vacuum itself was solid ground beneath those glowing feet. The 3 warships of the Vexari Dominion hung in formation ahead, each one bristling with weapons capable of destroying entire planets. For a moment nothing happened, and Marcus held his breath waiting to see if the Dominion would simply open fire and end this before it truly began. Then Warlord Thalvik's voice crackled over the station's communication system, and for the first time it carried a note of uncertainty. What trickery is this? The warlord demanded. Identify yourself immediately, or we will destroy you where you stand. Kirith's response came not through any communication device, but directly into the minds of everyone within range of the station. The words resonated with power that made the walls vibrate and the lights flicker. I am Kirith the Undying, last of the Griffin sovereigns, the ancient being announced. You stand before the ruler of an empire that governed the cosmos, when your ancestors were nothing but dust drifting between the stars. Silence followed that declaration. Then Thalvix laughed, but the sound was forced and nervous. The Griffin sovereigns are a myth, the warlord shouted. Children's stories told by primitive species to explain things they could not understand. Whatever you are, you will die for this deception. The lead warship opened fire. Beams of energy that could have shattered continents lanced toward Kirith's glowing form. Marcus cried out in horror, certain that he was about to watch his friend destroyed in an instant. But Kirith simply raised one hand, and the energy beams stopped in mid-flight. They hung frozen in the void as if time itself had forgotten how to move. Then Kirith closed that raised hand into a fist, and the energy simply ceased to exist. You inherited an empire built on our ruins, Kirith said with terrible calm. You believed the lies your ancestors told because the truth was too frightening to remember. The ancient sovereign gestured toward the lead warship, and Marcus watched in amazement as the vessel's weapons began to dissolve. The massive cannons and missile tubes simply fell apart, their molecules scattering into the void like sand blown by an invisible wind. We created your kind to be defenders, Kirith continued. We gave you strength and purpose and a place in the order of things, and you repaid us with betrayal and destruction. The second warship tried to flee, its engines flaring to maximum power as it attempted to escape into hyperspace. But Kirith made a pulling motion with one hand, and the ship was dragged backward as if caught by an invisible chain. There is no escape, the Sovereign declared. Not from justice, and not from me. Thalvik's voice came over the communication system again, and this time it was shaking with genuine terror. We did not know, the warlord pleaded. We were told the sovereigns were destroyed ages ago. We were told that our empire was rightfully ours. Your empire was built on genocide and lies, Kirith replied. And today it ends. What happened next would become legend across 1,000 galaxies. Marcus watched as Kirith reached out with both hands and seized the 3 warships with power. That defied all understanding. The Sovereign did not destroy them, though that would have been easy. Instead, Kirith began to dismantle the vessels piece by piece, separating the weapons from the engines from the living quarters. The soldiers and crew members floated free in the void, their suits the only thing protecting them from the emptiness. But they were not harmed. Thalvik's flagship was pulled toward Kirith until the warlord's bridge was close enough for Marcus to see the faces of the terrified crew through the windows. You will return to your territories, Kirith commanded. You will dismantle every weapon, release every conquered world, and spend the rest of your lives in service to those you have wronged. And if we refuse? Thalvik asked in a broken voice. Then I will return, Kirith said simply, and I will not be merciful a second time. The warlord and his crew were released, their ships rebuilt without weapons and sent limping back toward Vexari space. Marcus knew without being told that the Dominion would comply. He had seen the fear in their eyes, the absolute certainty that they had encountered something far beyond their ability to fight or understand. The golden light in the void began to fade, and Kirith drifted back toward the station. By the time the ancient being walked through the door of the Drifter's Rest, it had resumed the humble form of the cloaked vagrant who had stumbled in on that stormy night. Marcus stared at the creature he had befriended, still struggling to process everything he had witnessed. The Vexari Dominion controlled hundreds of worlds, he said slowly. You just ended their empire in less than an hour. Kirith sat down at the bar and wrapped those long fingers round an empty glass. Their empire was built on fear and cruelty, the Sovereign replied. Such things are always more fragile than they appear. Station residents began to emerge from hiding, their faces filled with wonder and confusion. The mercenary who had mocked Kirith stood at the door with his mouth hanging open. The debt collectors looked like they might faint at any moment. Everyone had witnessed the power of the being that Marcus had sheltered and fed, and treated with simple kindness. Kirith ignored them all and focused only on Marcus. Your kindness has changed the fate of empires, the ancient being said. You showed mercy to a stranger when the rest of the cosmos had forgotten what that word meant. Marcus felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. I just poured you a beer, he said. Anyone could have done that. But they did not, Kirith replied. Only you. And for that, I owe you a debt that I can never fully repay. The Sovereign leaned forward. Name your reward, Marcus Vane. Wealth beyond imagination, power over worlds, a throne among the stars. Whatever you desire, I will grant it. Marcus thought about the offer for a long moment. He thought about all the things he could ask for, all the ways his life could change with a single word. Then he smiled and reached under the counter for a clean cloth. How about you stick around for a while? He said. I could really use help on busy nights, and you still owe me for all those beers. Kirith stared at him in disbelief. You could have anything in the universe, the Sovereign said. And you asked for my company? Marcus shrugged. I like having you round, he admitted. Besides, who else is going to listen to my stories when the bar is empty? Kirith laughed, and the sound was like distant thunder and wind chimes mixed together in perfect harmony. "Your species never ceases to amaze me," the ancient being said. And so it was that at a forgotten bar on a station at the edge of nowhere, an immortal god who had once ruled 1,000 galaxies took a job as a dishwasher, not because it was forced or obligated or bound by any power, but because a human had offered a drink to a stranger on a cold night and expected nothing in return. Word of what happened spread across the stars, and beings from 100 worlds came to see the human who had befriended a sovereign. They expected to find a hero or a legend or something extraordinary. Instead, they found Marcus Vane, a former soldier with tired eyes and calloused hands, pouring drinks and telling jokes and treating everyone who walked through his door with the same simple kindness. And they found Kirith the Undying, last of the Griffin sovereigns, washing glasses behind the counter and laughing at human jokes it did not always understand. It was the strangest sight in the galaxy, and somehow it was exactly right. The universe was full of power and violence, and beings who measured worth in conquest and domination. But in one small bar at the edge of everything, a different truth had been proven. That kindness was its own kind of power, that compassion could move even the most ancient hearts, and that sometimes the greatest strength in all the cosmos was simply the willingness to offer a beer to someone who needed one. Marcus never asked for anything more, and Kirith never stopped being grateful. And the Drifter's Rest became a legend across the stars, not because of the power it housed, but because of the humanity it represented. A reminder to every species in every galaxy that the smallest acts of kindness could echo across eternity